Okay, hi everyone. It's Tim Green, Features Editor of the MEF with you. And for the next half hour, I'm doing something slightly different. We're looking at issues around conversational commerce and marketing and advertising and so on, but doing it a little bit differently. Now, anyone watching from the UK of a certain age, like me, will remember a TV program called Blue Peter, a children's program from the 70s, where these presenters would make things and they would tell children watching how to do it. And to speed time up, they'd always say, "Here's one I made earlier." And it became a bit of a catchphrase. Anyway, in that spirit, here's 3 videos I made earlier, looking at different ideas around, first of all, mobile ID and user attribution. And then we look at mobile commerce, and then we look at message-based advertising. So 3 conversations I've had, and we're going to run those VTs. And we're starting off with Florian Lichtwald, who's the MD of Zeotap. And we talked about a new way to track and target users without infringing their privacy or infringing Apple's new privacy rules, which have changed everything for mobile app developers and publishers. So I hope the video handover is going to work well. And here's my conversation with Florian. Good. So today we're going to talk about the contentious topic of user attribution and mobile identity. So to kick it off, let's just talk about what's happened in the last few weeks, which is Apple deprecating its IDFA. So in plain language, can you explain what the IDFA did and how it's changed?
Ultimately, what we're seeing is kind of Apple taking things in their own hands when it comes to consent. So over obviously the last few years, right, with the introduction of GDPR, it was clear for everyone that identifiers linked to mobile devices actually are personal identifiers. That could be an IDFA, called as they are called on iOS. On Google, they are called Google Android IDs. So depending on which ecosystem you're on, there are identifiers which are being used to identify a device uniquely, which is then being targeted for advertising, for example, and for other purposes, right? Can be used for attribution, for measurement, for different analytics purposes. These IDs, which are operating system generated and are existing in the background, have become a very central component of anything happening around digital marketing and of any kind of, even app installs, right, are being tracked through these kind of IDs. And this is a very essential part of the ecosystem. Now, what Apple did is they said, whenever you want to access these kind of IDs, you need to actually show the user a very clear pop-up screen, which is ultimately a consent message. So the collection of consent from the user in very plain and simple language. And any app has to use this standardized Apple consent message whenever they want to access the IDFA or start collecting data on the user in the background for certain purposes, for example, better targeted advertising.
So obviously the upshot of this change is that without an opt-in, you now can't really identify a user in the same way that you used to be able to do. So what are the consequences for app developers, advertisers, and brands?
So the consequences are multifold, right? It can be for digital marketing, where user cannot be actually reached in the same accurate way as before. This means browsing experiences, or let's say app usage experience, become less relevant for the user. Advertisements shown are not anymore targeted to their behavior, to their profile, which ultimately kind of also harms the experience of the user to a certain degree, while on the other hand side, potentially less data of them is shared in the ecosystem. So that's, I guess, always the balance you have to find in the market. Other aspects are, as mentioned, measurement attribution cases, certain analytics cases, which are getting a lot harder.
So obviously the industry is now looking around for alternative ways to solve these problems. Before we get into those and before we get into what Zeotap is doing, what's wrong with old-fashioned contextual advertising?
Absolutely nothing. It is part of the advertising stack and has always been, to be honest. So we believe contextual will grow to a certain degree. It totally has kind of like its relevant position in the advertising ecosystem, but it doesn't work for each and every use case, right? So you have to imagine big companies investing more and more money actually in structuring their own data. So they're investing in platforms such as the Zeotap Customer Intelligence Platform to ultimately structure the first-party data, connect different silos, pull all their user data together, right? Invest in actually analyzing this data, having big data science teams to identify certain user groups, right, which they want to actually upsell something to. And of course, after you've done all that very expensive works, you also want to reach them, right, in a deterministic way. You then, let's say you've singled out an audience of 100,000 users who might be interested in the next best product you're offering or you're bringing to market. In this moment, you don't want to rely only on contextual anymore, right? Because you've actually singled out a very specific group based on various characteristics, based on data science models, and based on potentially even machine learning, right? Where you have identified and improved your algorithms over time. And now you want to reach these users. You actually want to reach these users. You don't want to reach somebody who actually might be the same, right? So what is there, right? What you can do is you rely on contextual for example, open reach, right? When you have a top funnel campaign where you want to generate general awareness and you believe that on some certain factors, right, you can narrow it down contextually. But for these other elements, we believe that authenticated users and authenticated traceability will be part of the solution.
Maybe we can now talk about your product and how you solve this issue. So tell us about your ID product.
We are betting or actually using an authenticated user solution. That means that we look at users which are authenticating themselves through other means of identifying. So for example, an email or phone number, which you might give to a publisher when logging into a service. And now we are already at the very crucial part, because if you're going to news websites these days, in many cases, you don't have to log in, right? You can just consume content. And we believe this is going to change over time, that all these different publishers out there are going to have a very strong motivation actually to convince you to log in or to at least give an email. And we are then kind of tapping into this, using the email, linking it to our ID Plus graph, which is located in Europe, to create actually a connectivity to the graph and to create a connectivity to that identity of the user. And we return a so-called ID Plus, which is a tokenized key. So it's a tokenized user key, which is specific to a user and a publisher. That means if you go to a publisher A, it's a different ID for yourself than publisher B, which we stamp to ultimately protect privacy, right? An ID Plus is only ever created when you've given your explicit consent. And so this actually doesn't even change with ATT, right, or Apple. We also have to follow the rules Apple is giving. So we cannot circumvent this. But what we can do is, for example, replace third-party cookies and replace methods, right, where user cross-site tracking doesn't work anymore. And here ID Plus comes in, right? It ultimately allows you to connect to users across sites again. And ultimately, you as an advertiser can now actually reach users across the open web again on publishers where they have logged in a very privacy compliant and actually sensitive mode to the privacy needs of the public these days.
So does that work across mobile websites, desktop websites, and apps as well?
Correct. Yes. So the solution is ultimately relying on any kind of login event the user is having. And if I'm saying login, right, it can also just be a newsletter sign up. So ultimately, any kind of means where you're identifying yourself with an email address. And yes, this can be across the different browsers, environments, and devices. We would be integrating a JavaScript on the page, a smart script, which picks up the email addresses, hashes it in browser, so it never actually leaves the environment in a raw format. No PII ever leaves kind of like in a non-pseudonymized way. That ID is then passed to the ID Plus service and is actually returned with an ID Plus, which is then stamped as a first-party cookie. All that happens through the script we're providing, and is very much an easy integration, which doesn't differ too much from the integration of a third-party cookie tracker today. And
in the future, do you expect your system to live alongside other similar systems, or how do you expect the market to evolve?
It's a very interesting question. I think nobody really knows at the moment, but what we're assuming is that these kind of universal ID solutions are there to actually take a certain piece of the market, right? I mentioned there's also contextual, there's also going to be cohort-based targeting. So at least 3 different components of the advertising ecosystem of the future. And in the authenticated domain, there's mostly going to be 3, 4, maybe only 2 predominant ID solutions out there. And they can very much coexist. So it's not an either or decision. It's ultimately having different ID solutions which drive demand from different advertisers. Today, you have maybe 50 trackers, third-party cookies on your page, right? We are simplifying this a lot if we go down to 3 or 4. So even though you might have more than one, it's still a huge simplification. So yes, we believe there's going to be a few which coexist.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that very clear explanation of the situation, and good luck with your product for the coming year.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, well, I hope you agree that was a very interesting insight into the challenges facing the ecosystem around how to target users without infringing their privacy. So much food for thought there. Obviously, this whole event has been centered on the potential of conversational messaging for brands. And a big challenge there is, how do you move customers from messages to potentially buying products or investigating brands further? And my next conversation is with Tristan Barnum, who's the head of marketing at Wildfire. And her company has invented a new way to trigger journeys to brand sites from inside messaging. And I'll leave her to explain more in the conversation we had earlier. Thank you. Good. So first of all, conversational commerce is something we talk about a lot at MEF, but from your point of view, how do you define it?
Yeah, I think we really bring kind of a different flavor to what you might be familiar with when talking about conversational commerce, because I think up until this point, it seems to all be about chatbots, right? And we really take a different approach. We believe the conversation is the commerce, the conversation that people are having with other people. 99% of messages are people talking to other people. It's peer-to-peer, it's P2P. And it's not really that we think A2P isn't interesting, it is. It's just not the largest opportunity out there. So for us, defining conversational commerce has to include all of that conversation, including P2P and not just A2P.
Okay, well, that's an interesting answer, and we'll dive into how your solution tackles that. Before we do that, though, why is now the right time for a different approach to commerce that includes conversation?
Yeah, it's a great time. And really, we've done a study with Verizon Wireless recently that found that 99% of US wireless customers, that was sort of the scope of this study, have made recommendations for brands or products via text. You can think back, and surely you've done this before. You weren't thinking of it that way about brands and products, but we do make recommendations to each other all the time. And actually 96% of them have actually made the purchase from their mobile device. So somebody gives you a recommendation, you end up buying whatever it was that they recommended. And we believe that giving users an improved experience with shortcuts to commerce within those text conversations is really the lowest friction, most quickly attainable approach to conversational commerce. And the time is right because with the advent of RCS and OTT making this technology possible, the timing just couldn't be better.
So could you give us a sort of customer's eye view of how your solution might look in real life?
Yeah, absolutely. You're actually probably familiar with how smart messaging works just for things other than commerce. You've seen your user experience improve in your messaging app already. For things like calendaring. So you're talking to your friend about getting together tomorrow at noon, and sure enough, a little shortcut appears where it says tomorrow at noon with a link out to your calendar. And hey, that was thoughtful. Like, what a nice little shortcut. Wouldn't it be nice to extend that shortcut experience to more than just like dates and addresses that link out to maps? It's sort of expanding that means you're thinking about taking your coffee making to the next level, right? You're going to start grinding your beans fresh every morning. And what do you do when you need to buy a coffee grinder? Well, you might go out and start slogging through reviews and reading up on that stuff. And you quickly realize that there's an entire range of coffee grinders that you have just no concept of how to choose from. But you do have one friend that takes his coffee seriously. And you text him and you say, hey, I'm looking to get a grinder. If you could do it all over again, what would you buy today? I give this very specific example because I had this conversation recently buying a coffee grinder. And, I was thrilled. I was like, oh, I can stop slogging through these reviews. I can stop worrying about it and just take the recommendation of the person that I trust, my friend, and go find the Encore. Well, I had to leave that message, open up a browser, go search for it, and then ultimately buy the thing. Wouldn't it be so nice if it did the same thing it did for my maps and my calendar? It underlined, Baratza Encore. I could click it and buy this very frictionless way. And so that is what our platform does, is allows for these shortcuts to be embedded right in the context of the messages. So I'm discovering products, I'm being given this shortcut that is very helpful for me.
So your system has to search for these products. So how does it do that? And do the vendors, do the sellers have to pay for that reference, or is it something that you embed in the channel itself? How does it work?
When you're typing a phone number or an address or a calendar, there's an algorithm there detecting that pattern. And this technology also just recognizes specific patterns. So a product name, a merchant, for example. And then what it does is once it finds something that it understands, it can expand its view a little bit and look for some context around it, right? So it perks up and says, it's looking for clues of where it's going to send that link.
So how do you get your engine into my phone?
Basically, the messaging provider can embed that at their gateway. Some of the brain of this can live all the way at the edge on the device as well. And we can really deploy in a number of different ways that keep this all within either the carrier or the messaging provider's infrastructure.
How have you done so far in terms of deployments? How widespread is your solution?
So it's a very new technology. We are getting started with pilots with several carriers and are in talks with many more. And what we're finding is that, of the about 3,000 messages that people send a month, some of those are, of course, recommendations. About 5 of them a month would have an opportunity to be linked. And those transactions that result from those recommendations are generating in excess of $10 per subscriber annually. So it's been very successful. This is what's turning messaging, which has considerably, just over time, has been this cost center for most messaging providers into a huge profit center.
So final question, what are your plans for the next year or two, and where do you see this going?
For the next year or two, I think, expanding out the types of links that the platform can generate, enterprise documents, things like that can all be shortcuts that are useful for our users. So besides continually refining the brain of this thing to be smart enough to provide links when appropriate, that link to the right places, all of that stuff is in constant development. It's a very sophisticated engine, but also thinking about the use cases, what will be most useful for users.
Well, it's a fascinating and slightly different take on conversational commerce than we're used to at the MEF. So thank you, Tristan, for that. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you agree that that was an interesting chat, and it just goes to show that there are always new ideas around how you can do advertising and do commerce, especially when it comes to mobile messaging, which we're all very invested in. And in a similar vein, I come to the last video now, which is my conversation with Nick Martin, who's the co-founder of Direqt. And his company is helping brands to launch new forms of advertising hosted by RCX chatbots inside messaging conversations. So let's run that VT. Thank you. Okay, so is there a problem with mobile advertising that you're trying to fix? If there is, tell us what it is.
Yeah, it's a funny question because mobile advertising is, for all intents and purposes, wildly successful, right? So in the US alone, $87 billion a year industry. It's forecasted to double in the next 3 years to 174 billion in just the United States. So when you have something that big that's growing that fast, it's hard to say there's a problem with it. But I think if you zoom in on the consumer experience and how mobile advertising campaigns tend to work, there's a lot of challenges. And it's not necessarily the advertiser's fault. It's just the set of circumstances they're dealt with and they have to manage through. So for example, right, if you think about how you engage with a mobile ad, you probably have one of two experiences. Regardless of where you see the ad, it's probably going to take you to either a mobile landing page where you're going to go on your mobile browser and visit a website, or to the brand's app. And each of these present a lot of challenges for marketers. So if you think about the mobile browser experience, well, it's not a native experience, right? The mobile website is a desktop experience shrunk down into a smaller screen. It's sometimes hard to click the buttons. It's an inconsistent thing. And for all those reasons and more, they don't necessarily convert that well for the advertiser. You know, if you leave your mobile browser, they can't remarket to you. They can't prompt you to come back and finish the campaign and convert. On the flip side, if you think about apps, which are certainly native to mobile, they present a ton of challenges in the realm of advertising as well. If you've ever clicked on an ad that is leading to a brand's app, it actually takes you to the app store, right? You need to download the app first. To ask a consumer to click on your ad, go to the app store, click on download, probably re-enter their credentials, maybe forget their password, potentially have to wait for the thing to look at their face, to then remember to come back and open the app in 5 minutes when it's finally ready, when 17 notifications have already gone off in the meantime, makes it really hard to convert. And apps have challenges with retention in general. 71% of them are deleted within 3 months of download. And so I think in general, mobile advertising is a fantastic space and it works, but the way it works has a lot of built-in challenges. And we think there's opportunities with the future of chat and really RCS that'll create a much better experience for consumers and ultimately advertisers.
Okay, so describe what that experience might look like.
If you think about starting a conversation in the messaging app with a consumer versus going to a mobile website, right? All of a sudden you're delivering an experience that's native to mobile. Consumers love messaging, right? There's more active users of messaging than all the social networks combined. And so when you think about delivering experiences consumers want, you get better performance. In addition to this, messaging is based on the consumer's phone number. So if I get you to click on an ad that starts an RCS conversation, I can opt you in, I get first-party data, I have the opportunity to remarket to you as a consumer by sending you another text message later that day, the next day, et cetera. Those messages have a 98% open rate, so it's highly effective because, again, consumers love the channel. And then there's all these other benefits to it. Like, for example, if you talk to Nike as an advertiser via an RCS chatbot, and then you leave that conversation, well, now they're in your conversation history. And so when you come back into the messaging app to talk to your friends, you're going to see Nike again, you might re-engage, and at a minimum, they're getting those repeat impressions and brand recall and association. And so there's a ton of reasons it's really compelling, and I could certainly talk about them for the next hour. But at a high level, we think it's about building a direct relationship with your audience.
How does that conversation start? What does the launch point look like for the advertising campaign?
It's a great question. So it could start from anywhere, right? There's deep linking and there's no need to install a brand's chatbot. Unlike apps, you don't have that friction. So you could click an ad on Facebook, on Instagram, and it could start an RCS conversation. We're really interested and focused on delivering an end-to-end experience within the messaging app itself. So for example, we're working with a network of content publishers that will be launching RCS chatbots for in the coming months with a big partner operator, and then subsequently scaling that out to other operator partners globally. And if you just think about content, right? We spend 11 hours a day with digital media as consumers. It's almost all of our waking hours. If you pick one off the top of your head, maybe ESPN, a big sports content publisher here in the US. Imagine a consumer, instead of going to ESPN.com or ESPN's app, has ESPN text them news about their favorite team, their favorite sport, etc. And say you're browsing stories about football. Well, Nike can advertise in that conversation with ESPN, and ESPN can introduce Nike's football brand to you. And when you tap on that ad, again, instead of going to download the app, instead of going to mobile web, you stay within the messaging app, and now you're talking to Nike football. And they can use that conversational flow to do whatever they want. They can sell you a pair of cleats. They can opt you in for future communications. They can ask you questions for market research. They can sign you up to an exclusive club only for subscribers of the chatbot that get early access to new releases. And so the creative aspect is as big and broad as probably anything because of the nature of the back and forth communication. We know that from early trials with some of our partners in the chatbot building space, they've had their brand customers see an average of 6 to 8 engagements per conversation. So it's this hyper engaged audience, which is very different than what you would see in sort of a one-way landing page or app experience.
What are the barriers you have to overcome to get this into customers' hands? Is it a technical issue? Is it brands not understanding the nature of the opportunity? What is it?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple layers to it, right? There's the actual consumers with the RCS experience. GSMA expects that to be a little north of $1 billion by the end of the year globally, so it'll have scale. And that happens automatically, right? Their device gets updated and they have the experience. And then if you think about the content publisher, well, how do they package their content to deliver it to the consumer? Direqt makes that really, really, really easy. It's a very simple process. We can repurpose a lot of the technology they've already built, sort of snap our fingers and get them distribution through this new channel where they can own their audience, unlike going to social where there's an algorithm between them and their customer. And then on the advertiser front, it works the way any digital media buy works. And so for any brand advertiser that buys ads across the web, we're set up and we operate from both a technology and a business perspective exactly the way their sort of traditional display web media agency type contacts are used to operating. And so a brand or their media agency could get in contact with us, partners at Direqt.io, and very quickly get started in the channel.
What's been the response from brands so far? Have you launched many services, and what kind of ROI are they achieving?
So we're pre-launch on the in-chat advertising capability we're talking about. In the very near term, we'll be launching the network of publishers and then subsequently begin bringing in the brand advertising. We've done some tests with an operator partner who I won't name about driving purchase and conversions and delivering offers to consumers in the messaging channel. And we're seeing conversion rates that are astronomical compared to what you would see again from their website, et cetera. And so we know, because consumers and humans, right? It's a human thing. We like to have conversations. It's hardwired into us. It drives a better performance. We believe that's going to be true within RCS as well, and probably a lot better because it's native to the app. When you're in the messaging app, you're there to have conversations. And so we expect it to be above what we've seen in other mediums.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Nick, for joining us today, and good luck with your plans for the rest of the year.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Well, I hope you enjoyed watching those videos. I certainly enjoyed making them. And I think that it illustrates just what a dynamic space message-based commerce and advertising is. And also that MEF members are right at the heart of some of those big ideas. So again, I hope you enjoyed that. You can catch up with those videos if you missed them or if a colleague missed them on the MEF website over the next few weeks. With that, I'll hand you over back to James, and I believe he has a session on the future of A2P SMS with Infobit. Thanks very much.